Okay, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to everyone. We are going to do a short presentation today on a very interesting topic that I've touched upon before on my YouTube channel and on Spaces on Twitter. Me and Farouk have had many discussions about this, but I thought I'll do something a bit more, uh, you can say, formal or a little more organized, and do a presentation in regards to the Jinn hypotheses. And what I mean by that is considering the current interest in the UFO phenomenon on different spheres, I think it's important to get a Muslim perspective on the topic and just to see what different types of interpretations that we have as Muslims and why I believe that the Jinn hypotheses or this particular interpretation of what's going on is currently the most sound. So without further ado, let's get into it, inshallah. Now, the very first thing, before we sort of delve into this short presentation, it's important to understand a couple of things. Number one, this particular topic uh, on the phenomenon or the UFO phenomenon, which is, and it's not limited to just UFOs. And when we say UFOs, we think of, you know, craft in the sky or ships of some sort flying through the air. There is so much more to this, as we will discuss and as we'll see through the presentation. But the thing to note is that this you can study this or look at this phenomenon through many different perspectives or many different lenses, or there's many different spheres, if you like. Now, there's the governmental sphere, so there's what's going on a governmental level, and there's been quite a lot of noise recently, especially over the past couple of years. There's been congressional hearings, there's been whistleblowers, and so on. And everyone's waiting for a disclosure of some sort to come. Then you can say, the academic sphere, where academics have been studying the topic of UFOs from many different perspectives over this past several decades. Psychologists have taken a look at the topic and given their analysis. Uh, Anthropologists have done the same. Sociologists have done the same. Religious studies professors have also done the same. So there is that dimension as well. Then you could say there's the religious perspective, and that's what I'm going to be going into today. Um, the theophilosophical uh, perspective is probably more accurate because I'll be looking at some of the philosophical implications of this and presenting an argument uh, or reasons why I believe that the Jinn hypotheses to interpret this phenomenon as the Jinn is most sound currently based on what we know and the evidence we have at hand. So that being said, let's dive in. So what we will be discussing is a couple of things. Number one, we will look at what the Jinn are. So what are the Jinn? Giving a brief sort of introduction to them. Number two, what's their purpose? Number three, we'll also look at not 5 key areas, 4 key areas. Excuse the mistake in the presentation. 4 key areas of comparison. So number one, it will be the presentation and interaction. So how this phenomenon presents itself and how that compares to the jinn and the interactions between contactees and these beings and how that's similar to what we know about the jinn. Number two, we'll look at deception, the element of deception within this phenomenon, and compare that to the jinn. Number three, we'll look at the phenomenon of abduction, and again compare that to the jinn. And number four, we'll look at possession and attachments briefly. And finally, we will sort of look at some what I refer to as sticking points or the supposed loose ends, things that may not easily or readily fit into this particular theory. And then just conclude on some final thoughts, inshallah, God willing. So I think the first thing we need to do is sort of just briefly look at uh, Islamic cosmology. And what I mean by that is the sort of hierarchy of beings from an Islamic perspective and how Muslims understand the world. Now, we begin with Allah. Allah is the creator, right? Allah is, well, in English, you would say God, but it's probably not the most fitting word. But Allah is the creator of everything that exists. He is the first and the last. He has no beginning. He has no end. There is nothing like him, as we read in the 112th chapter of the Quran. And he is able to do all things. He is the all-powerful, the all-knowing, the all-wise. And like I said, there is no comparison to him. There's nothing we can compare to God. We cannot imagine the creator. What we can say about him is based, what we say about him is based on what we know about him through revelation, through the Quran itself. So we begin with God. He is the creator. Now, the following beings are in no particular order. They're just listed in that way on the slide. But there are creation of God. And God has created everything that exists. Every single atom is created by God. But there are some key beings that are outlined and highlighted within Islam. And there are others that God mentions as well. But these are the ones I guess we can focus on for now. There is the angels, and again, in no particular order, there are the angels. Angels are beings made of light, and they obey God's commands. They do not disobey God in any shape or form. They are constantly and perpetually engaged in the worship of the creator of the heavens and the earth. Then you have the jinn, and the jinn are the beings we're going to be going into in a lot more detail and studying them. But the jinn are made of a type of fire, a smokeless fire. So they are beings who are also were created with a purpose. They are beings that have, you can say, free will, like human beings, and they are beings who, in many ways, are similar to human beings, and then in many ways they are different too. The human beings, and we have the humans. We know the humans are made from a type of clay-like substance, the earth, and we exist in this physical material realm, and we live our lives in this world, and we again have live with a purpose, and we'll get to what the purpose is. And the purpose of the jinn and the human beings is identical, as outlined by the Quran. So the Quran says in chapter 55, verse 15, God says, and he created jinn from a smokeless flame of fire. Uh, this is their essence. This is what they're created from. Now, the scholars some have mentioned that this is not the fire that is produced from burning wood or coal or things like this. It is a type of fire. It's a special type of fire. Um, some modern interpretations of this have been that you can possibly relate this to plasma, the fourth state of matter. But again, that's speculative. But the key thing to note here is that they are beings that are created from the element of fire, or a type of fire, a smokeless type of fire. And their purpose, as God outlines, is the same as the purpose of human beings. God says, indeed, God says, I did not create the jinn and humans except to worship me. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. The Arabic, that God did not create the jinn kind or the human beings for any other reason except to know God and to worship Him. So the purpose of the jinn is the same as the purpose of human beings. Now, historically speaking, the interaction between man and jinn goes all the way back to Adam. And the story is captured in the Quran in different places in the Quran. And there are some verses here which we'll briefly cover, which highlight some aspects of that interaction. Um, but it's also important to note that the jinn were created before human beings. They existed before us, they inhabited the earth. And then later, God created Adam. And in the Quran, chapter 18, verse 50, God says, and remember when we said to the angels, prostrate before Adam. So they all did, but not Iblis, who was one of the jinn. But he rebelled against the command of his Lord. Would you then take him and his descendants as patrons instead of me, although they are your enemy? What an evil alternative for the wrongdoers to choose. Now, this verse highlights to us a couple of things. And some context to this verse. Iblis was a jinn. Iblis is the name of the jinn, and you'll find him mentioned in the Quran. The jinn that was totally obedient to God. He worshipped God as proficiently as he could. He obeyed God, and he was such a great worshipper of God that he was elevated to the level of the angels. And he was amongst the angels for a period we're not aware of, worshipping God, obeying God, carrying out God's commands. Then when God decided to create Adam, and Adam was taught or given certain faculties and abilities, which again, you can go to the second chapter of the Quran and read up on this if you're interested. And then Adam displayed these abilities, mainly being of knowledge, in front of the angels. God told the angels to prostrate to Adam out of respect. Now, all of the angels, because the angels don't disobey God, all of the angels fell in prostration to Adam, except for Iblis. Now, Iblis was, like I said, amongst the angels. He was there amongst the party of angels, the hordes of angels, and worshiping God. And at this moment, he disobeyed the command of God. He did not prostrate to God. Now, in other parts of the Quran, we read why he didn't. It was because of his arrogance. He became arrogant. He became jealous, and he believed himself to be superior than this new creation. And we find him saying, and I'm paraphrased, that the reason he didn't prostrate in front of Adam was because he said, "I am made of fire; he is made of clay. I am better than him." Essentially, that's what he was saying. And it was this arrogance that removed him from the mercy of God, and he became the accursed one, or Satan, as we know in English, or Shaitan, as we say in Arabic. And this also brings us to another point, that the jinn, not all of them are evil, not all of them are bad. So he was originally known as Iblis, who was a jinn, but then he was known as Shaitan, or Satan, the accursed one. And so there are shayateen, they are the ones that have a satanic disposition amongst the jinn, and there are the good jinn, just like amongst human beings. There are some amongst human beings that are known as shayateen as well, Satans, essentially, evil people. And then there are good amongst human beings. So at this moment, he is removed from the mercy of God. He becomes Satan, he becomes Shaitan, and he has an objective now going forward, which is to mislead human beings. He wants to almost prove to God that he was right. And we know he was wrong. But however, he wants to prove his point, and he made it an objective for himself, and he asked time from God to give him time till the day of judgment so he can mislead human beings throughout the ages and prove, therefore, that these human beings aren't worthy. So it's important to also understand this distinction, because when we say jinn, we don't want people to think that they're all evil or they're all bad. No, we know of examples in the Quran as well. There were a group of jinn who heard the Prophet, peace be upon him's recitation. On one occasion, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was returning from Taif, and the famous incident of Taif, when he went to call the people of Taif to Islam, and they rejected him and they pelted him and beat him out of the city. When he returned on the way back, he rested because he had to get permission to enter the city again, to enter Mecca again. And he rested the night outside of Mecca. And it was at this time when believe during Fajr, when the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, was praying, that a group of God sent a group of jinn to listen to the recitation of the Quran. And we read this story in Surah Jinn and in Surah Al-Ahqaf, I believe, where they listened to the recitation, they accepted the message of Islam. And then not only this, they went back to their communities and they delivered the message to their communities. So they gave their communities that, they called them to Islam. And this highlights to us that there are amongst them, there are good jinn as well. And this also brings us to another point, that amongst the jinn, there are different groups that believe in different things. There are Jews, there are jinns that are Jews, there are jinns that are Christians, there are jinns that follow Moses, there are jinns that may be atheists too and secularists too. We don't know, right? But the point is, like human beings, they have they have factions within the communities that believe and follow different things. And overall, on top of this, there are those that are good and those that are evil and bad. In Quran 7:12, Allah asked, "What prevented you?" And this is the verse, "from prostrating when I commanded you?" He replied, "I am better than he is. You created me from fire and him from clay." Now, this "I am better than him," you will see this manifest almost in a symbolic way in elements of the UFO phenomenon too, when it shows itself to be better than human beings. But we'll get to that as we go along. But it's like an interesting point to keep in mind. And then in 1539, we read, Satan responded, "My Lord, for allowing me to stray, I will surely tempt them on earth and mislead them altogether." So again, here Satan or Shaitan uh, is highlighting his objective that he wants to mislead human beings throughout the ages now. That this is his objective. He wants to misguide human beings, take human beings away from their purpose of existence, which we saw a few slides ago, which is to worship God. So not only is he and his like not doing this, but they want others not to do this as well. They want others to stray away from the purpose of life, the ultimate objective of life, which is to know God and to worship him. So that was a bit about the jinn. So a couple of things just in summary. Number one, they are a creation of God. They have communities. Their essence, or they are created unlike human beings from a smokeless fire. Now, like I said, there's many speculations in regards to this. Possibly you can say a plasma-based life form, and that would be an interesting speculation because um, I probably shouldn't get into it here, but for those that are studying physics, uh, they will probably have ideas going off in their mind. Like, okay, plasma-based life form. That's very interesting. How that may relate to certain things that we see or have observed about the UFO phenomenon. But regardless, that's a side point. They're made from a smokeless fire. Their objective, at least the evil amongst them, their objective is to misguide human beings till the day of judgment. Shaitan, their leader, Iblis, who disobeyed God, his primary objective is to misguide humanity. And if you go further, their ways are exposed in the Quran. The ways they will try to deceive human beings are exposed. God continuously tells us to protect ourselves and seek refuge in him from the accursed one, Satan, from his whispers, because he whispers into the minds of human beings. He whispers into the breasts of human beings. He inclines humans to do bad and evil, right? So this is their fundamental, or this is his fundamental objective, and the ones that follow him amongst the jinn. So the UFO and the Jinn, a comparative analysis or a comparative study of the two. And here I'm only going to briefly mention a couple of categories, the four I've outlined at the beginning. And there's many more aspects to this, but I think these four are quite sufficient in presenting or proposing this hypothesis that the Jinn are most likely behind this modern day UFO phenomenon. So let's look at the first one: presentation and interaction. Now, let's look at what's been reported briefly when it comes to the UFOs. Orbs. Okay, this is a very common presentation of the UFO phenomenon. Balls of light, different colored balls of light that are found seen in the sky, that are seen on ground level, that are seen in people's homes, balls that morph into different shapes. Uh, Interestingly, when humans have come into contact with these, they have left or done damage to human beings, physical damage. These things have been reported as well. The other thing is metallic craft. So some people have seen craft of different shapes and sizes, squares, odd shapes, shapes that you wouldn't expect, according to our understanding of physics and propulsion, to be able to remain up in the sky. So squares, spheres, triangles, rectangles, odd shapes like this. And sometimes these craft are said to morph into different shapes, strangely. Um, at other times, people are reported seeing these things. They've taken pictures of them, but when they've looked at the picture later on, it's not appeared as what they've actually seen. But what appears is something totally different on the image. So very strange things going on with these observations. And as far as the beings are concerned, there are again appearance of many different beings. You've got the typical greys. Some people claim reptilian type beings. Some people claim all sorts of strange looking creatures, but the greys are a very common representation of this: beings with big heads, big eyes, small bodies, etc. And then just generally strange creatures. Now, if you look at Skinwalker Ranch, a hotspot, an apparent hotspot in America. Let's just pause this. Sorry about that. So yeah, let's continue. So strange creatures, other strange creatures that have been reported in places like in Utah on the Skinwalker Ranch, and by others, strange dog or wolf-like looking creatures that suddenly appear and disappear, and other strange entities that people have seen related or in places where also other UFO phenomenon has been observed itself. So that's sort of the main overall presentation of UFOs. You'll get the orbs, you'll get the metallic looking craft. Some people that have had further contact or been abducted, which we'll look at in a second, they will report seeing beings. Normally, the grey uh, beings, the classic grey with big heads, big black eyes, small bodies, and sometimes they look different. Right? So when we look at it from this Islamic perspective, as far as the different forms the jinn appear in, there are some interesting correlations here. Uh, we know that the Prophet ﷺ, and there is a narration here, said the jinn have three forms. One form like dogs and snakes, one form flies through the air, and one form comes and goes. Now, this is interesting. And as far as I know, the scholars have mentioned that they are not limited to these forms, but these are the main forms they take. And what's interesting is when you analyze this, is that the first form is seems to be the form of certain animals. They take on the form of certain animals. Dogs and snakes are specifically mentioned. So I find it very interesting that on places like the Skinwalker Ranch, you have reports of large wolf-like creatures, right? Uh, and the stories are all there for you guys to go and read for yourselves. And then you have the form that flies through the air. Now, this is very interesting because most UFOs or UAPs are seen in the air, whether they're in the form of orbs or craft, they are seen flying through the air. I mean, straight away, that's the link that's made. You don't hear of UFOs appearing in someone's living room, although some people have even reported that. But the point is that it's very interesting that the Prophet mentions that there's a form of jinn that fly through the airs, and then there's the form that comes and goes, and this again is very interesting. A type that appears and disappears. Many reports of UFOs. One of the reasons for example, Valet and others believe that these aren't extraterrestrial beings from other planets is because of the way these craft materialize and dematerialize. According to their own words, they just appear and suddenly fade out of existence, and that's it's an anomalous thing that they cannot explain. So this particular narration, in and of itself, I think summarizes most of the observable, at least, appearance of the UFO phenomenon. What's seen in the skies, in people's homes, on certain places of land, etc. So this is, what this highlights on top of it is that the jinn can take many forms. They can appear in many different ways. And it's when they appear or take on a specific form of a physical thing is when they are observable to other human beings. They appear in the form of a man. There is a hadith, it's a very long narration of Abu Huraira, where he was put in charge of the charity. And a few nights back to back, this individual came and tried to steal and stole from this charity pot and took loads of foodstuffs and things like this. And he caught him and he said, I'll take you to the Prophet, peace be upon him. And he said, no, 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 I'm poor, my family's suffering, my family's starving, so let me go. And he did this first night. He went to the Prophet. The Prophet, peace be upon him, told him he'll return the second night. He went back, kept an eye out. Sure enough, this individual came back and started stealing again. He caught him again, made up another excuse, right? Made another lie up. He let him go again. Abu Huraira let him go again. And then he went back to the Prophet and he said he'll return. And then the third night, he returned again. And this time he grabbed him. He said, I'm going to take you to the Prophet. And at that moment, this person said to him, no, 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 I'll teach you something. And he taught him to recite Ayatul Kursi, which is a verse from the Quran, every night. Because if one was to recite this, it will protect that individual from any devil throughout the night. And then he left and he went and told the Prophet, Abu Huraira went and told the Prophet, peace be upon him, this. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, interestingly said that he spoke the truth in this case, and that Abu Huraira, had been engaging with a shaitan, right? So this particular narration highlights to us that the jinn also can appear in the form of other human beings. They can take the form of humans. Based on these two narrations, we can tell they could take the form of humans, they could take the form of animals, they can also appear as things that fly through the sky, and they can come and go, appear and disappear, right? So all of these things are very interesting, and this at least creates a scope for us, an interpretive scope. And what we can see is that conceptually, at least, with the way the jinn can manifest and take on forms, it explains the appearance of the UFOs and the different manifestations of UFOs. Uh, in the book, The World of the Jinn and Shayateen, Dr. Umar al-Asqar, he writes, sometimes the devils come to man not by way of waswas, whispers, rather they appear to him in human form. A person may hear a voice and not see a body, or they may appear in strange forms, which come to people and tell them that they are from the jinn. Sometimes they lie and say that they are angels, and sometimes they call themselves men of the unseen, or claim that they are from the spirit world. In all cases, they speak to some people directly or by means of one person who is called a medium. So this is when they speak through mediums who channel these beings, whom they possess, and they speak on his lips. Or the response may come in the form of writing, or it may go uh, further than that, and they may pick up a person. They may pick a person up and fly with him through the air. Very interesting, and transport him from one place to another. Or they may bring him things that he asks for. So again, the Sheikh here, and this, by the way, is a phenomenal book. It's a brilliant, brilliant book to read to study this topic. He highlights again all of the things mentioned above, and that they not only engage. And this is an interesting point for Muslims to understand as well, because maybe there's Muslims out there have had certain experiences that they can't contextualize, because the current understanding of the jinn or shayateen in our minds is possession or waswas. But here it's opening it up for us. It's telling us, well, they can appear to human beings in many different forms and in many different ways, even as voices people hear. Uh, Strangely enough, the Sheikh mentions that they can even pick people up and teleport them literally from one place to another. If you read Ibn Taymiyyah's essays on the jinn, uh, you'll read some mind-blowing stories there. People being dragged through their homes, and abducted, and all sorts of strange occurrences that have been reported. But again, the point here is, if you study the jinn as far as the appearance and the interactions are concerned with human beings, what becomes apparent is they can manifest in many different forms, take on many different appearances, and they deceive, right? And we'll get to the deception element in a second. However, this framework here now, if you look at the UFO phenomenon as far as its appearance is concerned and what people see, easily fits within the jinn hypothesis itself. So the element of deception. Now, this is from a very interesting book called Messengers of Deception, written by Jacques Vallée, who is a researcher, I believe an academic, well, definitely an academic, and has spent several decades studying the UFO phenomenon. And he is one of those individuals that doesn't believe these are extraterrestrials from another planet. His particular view is that these are some other form of non-human intelligence that's been here for a very long time, right? And this is based on his studies. And he writes here, the absurdity of many UFO stories and of many religious visions is not a superficial logical mistake. It may be the key to their function. According to Major Murphy, the confusion in the UFO mystery may have been put there deliberately to achieve certain results. One of these results has been to keep scientists away, up until now at least, right? The other is to create a form of social control, or a new religion, as some academics are suggesting today. A change in man's perception of his place in the universe, and he, end quote, it finishes there. And then what he does in this particular book is he outlines or highlights, as the name suggests, the messengers of deception, that this phenomenon, when it engages with human beings, there is a huge element of deception that is involved. Now, he outlines, I think, four main categories. There's probably a few more, but I've outlined four of them here. So there's the intellectual aspect of the abduction, where these beings are, and you could read the notes there, or the excerpts from his book underneath these titles. The intellectual abduction aspect is where these beings make people believe that they are superior intellectually and that they have the solution to their problems, um, and therefore making people feel inferior and therefore leading people to submit to them. Then there's the racist philosophy. The pernicious suggestion, as he writes here, the pernicious suggestion that some of us on Earth are of extraterrestrial descent and therefore constitute a higher race. Now, this is very interesting, and we're seeing this happen today as well. In a recent interview with Gary Nolan, uh, something very interesting was mentioned. He said that because he studied the brain scans of the people that have had contact with these beings, that these people's brains are in some ways more highly developed, that these people are more intelligent. Now, again, this creates a narrative that people that engage with the phenomenon, contact the phenomenon, believe in the phenomenon, are more intelligent people. And what this does on a social level, because everyone wants to be intelligent and wants to associate themselves with intelligent people, they automatically want to therefore believe in this phenomenon and contact this phenomenon and be contactees. So it's a very interesting psychological uh, situation here that we have. It's almost like today, at least, this phenomenon is engaging with respectable people within society, people that others follow. Uh, we've had D.W. Pasulka, who's written some very popular books currently. She's a professor of religious studies. And on her recent interview with Jesse, I don't remember his full name, Jesse, he's got a channel dealing with this topic. She actually comes out and says she's had experiences herself when she started studying this. Gary Nolan, he is a nominee for the Nobel Prize, and he himself has said openly in that interview that I mentioned earlier that he has had experiences with the phenomenon. So it's almost like this phenomenon is engaging with people of caliber within today's society, people that are respected, scientists, academics, people from the government, etc. Why? We can speculate on that. But I find it very interesting. I mean, if you're gonna get if you're going to start a new religion or a new way of life, then you need you need your saints, right? And what better than to have saints that are people of high caliber, respected people who people look up to, as opposed to just the common folk, right? So it's very interesting from this perspective. Then there's the technical impotence. The statement that the birth of civilization on this planet results not from genius and ability of mankind, but from repeated assistance by higher beings. So again, these contactees, and by the way, these are Valet studied abductees and their stories. And after studying many of these stories, he came to these sort of common traits which stood out of deception that were there amongst many of these reports. So these beings make people feel these during these contact events, people are made to feel like they are technically impotent, that the human civilization has been dependent upon these beings. These beings helped to develop human civilization, etc., etc. So this is very interesting as well. Look, if you want people to submit to you and to follow you, right, you have to show yourself to be superior, and you have to show yourself to be uh, a type of being that's been helping facilitate the growth of humanity throughout the ages. And this seems to be the case here. Social utopia, so there's these promises that are made by these beings about, been shown a new world, being shown a new place that they could be taken to, where they can start over again, and so on and so forth. And if you really look at all of these categories and you see what's going on here, it seems like that these contact events, these beings, what they're doing is they seem to be suggesting to human beings that they are superior, that they are better, that they are there to look out for us, that they are there to make the world a better place. And therefore, by presenting themselves in this way, it's people are going to feel naturally like they are dealing with beings that are a higher being, almost a divine being. And you have the professor of systematic theology, Ted Peters, he himself, in his essay on this, he basically highlighted that these are symbols, these are religious symbols. The way that this phenomenon is behaving is in a very religious way. The way these beings are presenting themselves is in a very divine way, right? And even from a governmental standpoint, if you look at the Nimitz incident, one of the most startling things about the incident is that you had the best technology that human beings have today, the best fighter jets from the superpower, the superpower of the world, America. And these supposed craft or objects in the sky were running circles around these craft. And again, what sense does this create in the minds of people? That these things, this phenomenon is superior to us. It is better than us, right? If you're going to show up the greatest superpower and the greatest technology they have, well, then the whole world is naturally going to believe that whatever this thing is far more powerful than us, and is greater than us, and therefore create this state of submission within people. Now, if you juxtapose this to the intent of Shaitan, as we spoke about earlier, which is he wants to misguide people. He wants to move people away from the worship of God, of Allah, and to the worship of other things. And historically, we know Shaitan has done this. I'll give you an example in a few slides where he slowly encouraged people of the past to fall into the worship of idols. It's almost like he's setting the modern mind up today, the secular mind, the techno-secular mind who doesn't believe in God. He's setting that mind up to fall into the worship of these higher beings, as opposed to the worship of the creator of the heavens and the earth. This is just me connecting the dots in my own way. I can't, this is my speculation and my thoughts, but it's very interesting when you see the correlations here. So there's the element of deception that Valet has noted. Now, we know from the Islamic tradition that the objective of shaitan is to deceive, is to mislead. In Quran chapter 4, verse 120, uh, it says, Satan only makes them false promises and deludes them with empty hopes. Truly, Satan promises them nothing but delusion. This verse in and of itself is profound, and it completely encompasses the previous slide, the element of deception that these beings are engaging in. Further, Quran chapter 20, verse 120, but Satan whispered to him, and this is to Adam. This is going back to the beginning, the origins of man. He whispered to him, saying, O Adam, shall I show you the tree of immortality and the kingdom that does not fade away? Very, very interesting, subhanAllah, if you think about this. So you can see the way Shaitan deceives here is he makes false promises, in this case to Adam, our father, the first human being, and he makes promises of immortality and the kingdom that never fades. Very similar, going back to the social utopia that's been promised to people today. Reports of people being promised to be taken to a new world, which is free of these problems and issues that we find in this world, etc. I mean, it's almost spot on if you think about it from this perspective. Uh, in Sahih al-Bukhari, there is a report, Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, said, all of the idols, and this is the narration I was speaking about, all of the idols amongst the people of Noah appeared among the Arabs later. They were the names of righteous men among the people of Noah. When they passed away, Satan inspired in their people to build statues in the places they used to sit, and named them by their names. They did so, and they were not worshipped until the first generation had passed away and knowledge was lost. Then they were worshipped. So you can see, according to this narration, Shaitan, Satan, or the evil jinn, the way they work is in gradual steps. They mislead people in steps, slowly over time. So in this case, with the people of the past, initially they encouraged them to make these idols and these symbols so they could remember the people, the great prophets and the great people of the past, just as a point of reference. And then over time, as the generations passed, people started to fall into the worship of these idols. And what was achieved? Satan's objective, which is to take people away from the worship of God and towards the worship of something else. And again, when you look at the UFO phenomenon, there seems to be a gradual process. Valet's mentioned this as well. There's this gradual uh, implementation of a new narrative. It's almost, and in Pasulka's words, a new religion that's been created and implemented in the world today. So it's, I mean, again, it's very interesting, these correlations, when you start to study them and look into them. Abduction. This is another very interesting one. I'm sure you'll find this interesting too. So John E. Mack. Now, this individual, before I read to you his quote, he wrote a book called Abductions. Professor John E. Mack. He was a professor at Harvard University, and he was the head of the Department of Psychiatry. So he was a big guy academically, right? He was a well-respected academic, and he started to study the abduction phenomenon, and he wrote a book called Abductions, and he did a lot of research into this topic. And he was ridiculed for this. He was shunned for this, and not surprisingly, because of the materialistic paradigm or the world that we are a part of today. But he took this very seriously. And he concluded that this is a real phenomenon. Something really is going on. This is not just a psychological projection of the mind of human beings, as psychologists would interpret. And he was a psychiatrist himself, and he believed something real was going on. And he says here, some have suggested that an alien abduction. Some have suggested that in alien abductions, we are dealing with some sort of mass psychosis, hysteria, or hallucination. But abductions do not resemble mass phenomena. Abductees are generally individuals who have, at least before being brought in contact with other experiences for purposes of support, been isolated from people having similar experiences. Right now, this is, I believe, back in the early, possibly the 90s, I think. Um, and so, we didn't have mass social media and stuff like this. People were having experiences of abductions, and they have been throughout the centuries. It's just been reported more so since the 40s and so on. But it's a real phenomenon that's been going on all over the world. People have been abducted or claimed to have been abducted. And during these abductions, they have these engagement with these aliens. Sometimes they just go through some strange medical procedures that don't make sense from the perspective of, if they were aliens, highly evolved, intelligent, developed aliens from other planets, and the sort of the way they are conducting experiments on human beings is very strange. Sometimes you have that element, and then on the other side, you have that contact from the perspective of a communication and a dialogue, where the deception element comes in. And one thing I didn't mention in the deception section was, I think it was Ted Peters who made this analysis that there's been a deception of origin as well. So when these beings or these abductions were happening in the early 90s, they would claim they were from Mars. And then later, as science progressed, and from Venus, and when they later on science discovered that Venus is uninhabitable, you can't stay, it's too hot for human life to exist or any life to exist. Then during later abductions, the story changed. Then they said they were from Mars, and then later they changed it again. Then they said they were from a different planetary system. I think in the Betty and Barney Hill incident, um, they showed a space map, and when I think Betty or Barney, one of them, drew the map out, it just didn't make any sense from the perspective of what we knew about the stars in the sky, about astronomy. So the deception takes place during this abduction phenomenon, right? A lot of times, this contact happens during the abduction phenomenon. Now, according to Johnny Mack, the abduction phenomenon is real. His book has countless examples of it. I believe many other authors have written books on the abductions and abduction cases. The literature is out there, right? So it's been studied, this particular aspect of the phenomenon. Now, what's very interesting is that there is at least one clear narration of jinn abduction within Islam. This particular narration, and I'm not going to read the whole narration, but I'm going to summarize it for you. You guys can read it for yourself or screenshot it. This incident took place during the reign of the Caliph Umar, radiallahu anhu, where a man disappeared. His wife came and said her husband's disappeared, and Umar told her to wait for a period of 4 years. She waited for a period of 4 years. She returned, and he still hadn't returned. And then he nullified her marriage, and she moved on. And then, lo and behold, this individual reappears, and he comes to Umar, and he's asks about his wife and his family, and Umar says, "Well, your wife moved on. Well, what happened? Where did you go? You just disappeared. No one knew if you were dead or alive. What was going on?" And then he proceeds to tell Umar his story. And he tells him that I was leaving to pray Isha one night and I was abducted by a group of jinn and they kept me a captive. And there's the whole story is there and you can read it. And then what happened was that another group of jinn, believing jinn, came, invaded. They destroyed this evil group of jinn. And then they asked me if I wanted to return to my family. And I said yes. And then they returned me to my family and he came back. This is how he came back. And then Umar believed his story and further gave him a few options as to what he could do in regards to his ex-marriage. And this is a story. It's there within our tradition, right? If you read again Ibn Taymiyyah's essays on the jinn, you can see similar stories about abductions, people being dragged out of their homes at night. If you look at now, if you open this up to Islamic history, and the Arabs, the history of the Arabs, you will see many stories of abductions of people and people being captured and taken away, right? So the abduction phenomenon is there within the Islamic tradition. It's linked directly to the jinn. So this is another clear parallel between the phenomenon and the jinn, and a very interesting one for that. Now, just briefly on the possession and attachment, there is this element of the phenomenon that's known as the hitchhiker effect. What's his name? Dr. Kelleher, I believe, and the reporter, the famous reporter. They've written a book called Skinwalker in the Pentagon, I think, and they've done some lives on this as well. And they've coined a term. I believe they've coined it. It's called the hitchhiker or the hitchhiker effect, where what they're saying is whenever one comes into contact with the phenomenon or has an experience with a UFO or some sort of being, there is something that follows that person back home and not only affects them but affects their family. It's almost like a contagion, and it really plays games and tricks and devastates the family, and it impacts the family in a very negative way for a very long time after, right? So it's almost like an attachment or a possession type of situation. uh, Kenneth Arnold, and I think this is an excerpt you can see from, or uh, based on what they were discussing on the podcast. Kenneth Arnold was one of the first individuals to have a sighting, I believe in the 40s, late 40s. And he was the one, once he reported his sighting, then this whole flying saucers thing and these taglines became very popular amongst mainstream media and news outlets at the time. But this was one of the first individuals, a pilot, to report these sightings. He observed like 9 craft or something. His daughter later on I believe on a radio interview, started highlighted that her family and his house and he himself was affected by something, after this experience that stayed with him. Many abductees and people that have had contact make the same claim, that they are followed by something, something attaches itself to them, something affects them in a negative way, not only them, but their families. Uh, Dr. Kelleher even mentions it as it's like a contagion. So it spreads. So the person that's the contactee, when he comes into contact with another person, this seems to spread from person to person. And this is very interesting because we know of the possession and attachment phenomenon within Islam. And this is probably the most well recognized aspect of the jinn in our societies today, or at least in the minds of Muslims, the possession phenomenon, that the jinn possess. And then there are exorcisms that people, ruqya, that's carried out. And this is a particular narration from, or an ayah from Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 275. And it says, those who eat riba, usury, will not stand on the day of resurrection except like the standing of a person beaten by shaitan, Satan leading him to insanity. And this is one of the ayat that's quoted as an evidence for the possession phenomenon within Islam itself. I believe Ibn Taymiyyah himself quoted this particular ayah. So, this whole idea of attachment, being followed by jinn, being attacked by jinn, being possessed in one way or the other, or being led to believe one is possessed and led to insanity, because waswas can make you believe some very strange things based on your psychological disposition. This is there within Islam, and we're seeing something very similar amongst the UFO contactees, people that have experienced the UFO phenomenon. There's this hitchhiker effect, as I refer to. Something gets attached to them, something follows them. They have visions and they have dreams and they get messages and all of this type of strange stuff. Right. So again, another very clear parallel. Now there are some um, what you can call uh, loose ends. I wouldn't say loose ends, but some difficult things to correlate, at least on the surface. The first is the tech and craft, right? So there's claims by the government that we have retrieved crashed craft, that we have downed craft. Weird, some strange claims. None of these have been validated or proven, by the way. But these claims are there that we have material, exotic material from these craft, etc. Now, how does this link to the jinn? Right? This is something we need to ask as well, because if we're positing a hypothesis or a theory, we have to look at the things that don't really add up or match as easily. Whereas the others did, the abduction side of it, the deception side of it, the appearance side of it, and the other things we looked at are almost a clear match. You can see how they clearly corroborate and clearly link to one another. What about the things that don't easily fit in? So the tech and craft, assuming that there is actual physical material that's been recovered and so on and so forth. How do we explain it? Well, there's an interesting verse in the Quran, in chapter 38, verse 37, where Allah says, and we subjugated to him, this is referring to Sulaiman alayhi salam, every builder and diver of the jinn. Now, Allah mentions and highlights the jinn as builders and divers. Okay. Now, we know they worked for Sulaiman alayhi salam. They probably built some amazing things for him and carried out some amazing feats for him. And it's a very interesting story to go and study in and of itself. But the fact that they are recognized as builders means that they build, right? Allah wouldn't call the jinn builders if they didn't build, right? So it's not a stretch to assume that the jinn, have been built because they've been around and they supposedly have longer lives than us. They live longer than us. They were created before us. They occupied the earth before us. They have their own communities. It's not a stretch to assume that the jinn may themselves be engaged in building things, technology, right? They may have access to technology. Uh, if you read Ibn Taymiyyah's essays on the jinn, there's a mind-blowing story he shares where some of the Sufi sheikhs at the time, his time, were given devices by the jinn, right? And we've shared this in our previous lives, the excerpts, but you can go read it for yourself. Devices, almost like glass-like devices with water or something flowing over. And I'm paraphrasing that these devices were given by the jinn to these Sufis. So, and through these devices, they can contact them from vast distances, right? So this is, I mean, this is tech. This is something that's technological that's been given to these Sufis that were engaging with the jinn at the time, right? So it's not a stretch to assume that they have their own technology and so on and so forth. It could also be a part of the deception, right? And again, I'm speculating because all of this is speculation. There's, none of this is proven, but especially when it comes to the tech and retrieval of craft and materials, but it could also be a part of the deception. It can also be an aspect. It could be that the jinn are systematically delivering forms of technology to human beings, technology that eventually or has in many cases led to the destruction of human beings. Because when, say, a government receives some sort of tech, yeah, with the false narrative of alien beings from another planet who are far more advanced giving us technology, once they receive something like this, what are they going to do? They're going to study it, they're going to reverse engineer it, and they're going to use it for military purposes. Why? So they can get dominance over the world. So and if you go by the claim some others have made that much of the technology that's been delivered that humans have developed originally has its origins or been given by the jinn to human beings at some point. We've seen the devastation and destruction such technology has created on Earth, right? Maybe that's the case. Maybe it's just a part of the deception to solidify the narrative that they are extraterrestrials or aliens from another planet. Maybe they're just dropping off pieces of metal that have different isotopic ratios as when they're studied seem to show, because we know the jinn can traverse parts of space that human beings can't. And I'm speculating here, but I'm just putting this information out there because what I'm trying to get across is that conceptually, this is not a stretch. Conceptually, we can make sense of tech being given or materials being discovered and so on and so forth. As far as the appearance of metallic craft, uh, again, it could just be an appearance. It could be a projection that's been put up there because there are reports of people seeing things, but when they take pictures, nothing comes up in the picture. So it's almost like that person is being shown something which isn't really there, but it's what they're being shown. Uh, Ibn Taymiyyah mentions that the jinn creating images which were hard to decipher whether they were real or not for the magicians or people, right? So again, conceptually, if they could do that, then maybe another possibility is that the craft people are seeing, if it's not the orbs of light, etc., which may be more easily explained, but the craft that they're seeing that looks technological is probably just a projection of some sort. Um, Maybe it is a built craft that they are somehow controlling through the space. Again, these are areas we can speculate about, but the key thing is that we can fit it within this whole framework. The next thing is biologics. Another claim that's made is, oh, we have recovered biological, well, at least claims being made during the congressional hearings in America as well, that they've discovered or recovered biologics, meaning bodies of aliens. Now, again, there's no evidence for this yet that we have, but assuming if they have, one way of potentially squaring this and understanding this could be, well, we know of narrations, and there's a very lengthy narration in Muslim of a man who was going home, and I'm paraphrasing it, but you can find it online. He was very upset by this. And she said to him, the reason I'm out here is because of look inside yourself. So when he goes in, he sees this massive snake coiled up on the bed. And we know the jinn can appear in the form of snakes. So long story short, he kills the snake, right? And he dies as well. And then when his companions go to the Prophet, peace be upon him, um, the Prophet basically outlines and he says, verily there are jinn in the Medina who embraced Islam. So if you see any of them, warn him for 3 days. And if he appears to you after that period, kill him, for he is a devil, say Muslim. So the Prophet ﷺ concluded or suggested that this snake that the man killed in the form of a snake was a jinn. Now, some of the scholars interpreted this and have said that when the jinn takes on a particular form, a physical form, a snake, a dog, whatever it may be, or another animal or thing, it can be killed in that form. Now, if this is the case, well, this may explain the biologics side, if it is true, if they have bodies, so on. This may explain that. Again, Allah knows best, but this is speculation. And there may be other ways of sort of squaring these points, right? But I'm just putting it out there. So something for us to think about. And maybe if you guys can let me know any of your thoughts in regards to this in the comment section below. But the key thing is that these are conceptually, we can work with this, right? There's ways we can work with this and we can fit it within our theory. So some final thoughts. Uh, we have hopefully we've only looked at some aspects of the phenomenon uh, and the jinn. There are many other aspects which correlate in amazing ways, but I've just outlined a couple for us, which really get us to appreciate the similarities between the UFO phenomenon and the jinn. When you study the phenomenon, you study the jinn and their abilities and their appearance and what they do and how they manifest, you see that there are clear similarities between the two. The element of deception is clear, and this is a well-known trait of the jinn themselves. So when you look at this, as they say, if it uh, swims like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. I'm butchering it, but something along those lines. And if you look at it from the perspective of conceptual differentiation, to claim two things to be different or separate, there has to be things that are different and separate about them. And otherwise, you're just talking about the one thing. So when you look at the jinn phenomenon or the jinn, and you look at the UFO phenomenon, the similarities are clear. You cannot deny them, from abduction to deception to appearance, etc., etc. Hence, looking at all of this, and I know some of the things we've mentioned about the UFO phenomenon is not common knowledge, because what you see on the TV or the narrative, and Dr. Pasulka mentions this as well in her book Encounters, a recent book, that the narrative created by the government and the mainstream media about the UFOs is very different from what's been experienced by people, what has been experienced by people throughout the decades, the ages, right? And when you look at what people are actually experiencing, what's really going on, and you correlate that with what we know about the jinn, it's a perfect match, right? Sure, there are some things that don't as easily fit, but when you really study the scope of the jinn and what they're able to do, then you see, okay, well, maybe there is a way of these things fitting, and there are only a few that are outstanding things that don't easily fit into the theory, but the rest, everything just falls into place. So, in a nutshell, I guess in summary, um, what I'd like to say is that Islam allows for both interpretations, by the way. Okay. I'm not playing the Jinn of the gaps card here. That's not what we're doing. We're not saying, oh, there's a gap, let's squeeze Jinn into it, right? And it's the Jinn. We're not in the position to have to do this within Islam. And the reason is because within Islam, the Quran and the tradition has the interpretive scope to account for extraterrestrial alien life, meaning beings from other planets. There are verses in the Quran which allude to this indirectly. Allah mentions, for example, that He, amongst His signs, and I'm paraphrasing, of the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the creatures that He scattered throughout them, and that He can bring these creatures together if He wills. So such verses open the realms, the doors up to the possibility of alien life, beings, physical beings from other planets. But so the point is that we have the scope for both interpretations. So there is no pressure or there is no need to fudge in a Jinn explanation. What we're doing instead is we're looking at the data, we're looking at the traits and the manifestation of the phenomenon, and we're looking at the traits and the concept of the Jinn. And when you study them side by side, you see that there is a clear correlation, that there are clear matches. So much so that I believe that the Jinn hypothesis, based on what we know, is the most sound hypothesis to explain this phenomenon. And furthermore, it's a means. And even if you're watching this and you're not a Muslim and you don't believe in revelation, even if you look at the Quran and the Islamic tradition as a historical reality, and these documents as historical documents, it's still fascinating that over 1400 years ago, here is a book that mentions a being and details about a being that exists amongst us, that is not human and is not divine, but is somewhere in between. And it mentions a being which has traits and abilities that match the current phenomenon being experienced by people in the West and across the world today, as in the UFO phenomenon. That's very interesting because a lot of people now, and there seems to be two camps within this subculture or this culture itself, the UFO culture. There's the camp that says extraterrestrial, and there's the camp that says no, it's something else, NHI, non-human intelligence, some sort of entity or being that's been here, possibly a dimensional being that's been here for a very, very long time. If you study the two camps, what you'll see is the weight is with the camp that says this is a type of non-human intelligence that is not extraterrestrial. The academics, Pasolka, Vallée, John Keel, and others who have spent years to studying this, they are in this camp, right? They are saying this phenomenon is not extraterrestrial, it's something else. It's another type of life form, another being that has lived here probably since the beginning, probably longer than us. Tucker Carlson recently has come out, said the same thing, right? Um, I believe Gary Nolan himself leans towards this opinion. Dr. Pasulka also seems to be leaning more towards this opinion. So I think it's very interesting that this is the state of the discourse right now. That the camp that suggests this is a type of non-human intelligence which is not extraterrestrial is weighing heavy right now. That seems to be the one that's gaining more traction. And when you study the Jinn and what they're capable of doing, and just the framework of Jinn and the concept of Jinn and what they're able to do, it fits perfectly with what we're observing. I think at the very least, there's something for the non-Muslim community to learn from the Islamic tradition when it comes to the phenomenon itself. That the study of the Jinn is going to only understanding of the phenomenon itself. So I think this is a very interesting time. And yes, it's an opportunity for people to read the Quran as well and study it, because there's so much more in the Quran than just the mention of Jinn, right? We believe as Muslims it's a guide for our existence on this planet. It tells us about the ultimate purpose of life and the meaning of life and why we exist and where we're going and where we've come from, and it addresses all the deeper existential questions as well. So there'll be so much more you'll gain, even if it may be through this topic that someone comes and studies the Quran itself. But anyway, I think we're living in interesting times, and this topic is getting very popular, and more people are paying attention. And I think it's time that we as Muslims present what we can about this phenomenon, and hopefully educate and share what we know about what's going on. And like I said, I believe based on making based on the analysis and the study, that most likely this phenomenon is linked to the jinn, right? And even if it isn't, if it's extraterrestrial, then Islam accounts for it anyway, regardless. But the point is that the Islamic tradition is not going to experience a crisis because or when disclosure happens, if it happens. Like many people have been saying, oh, it will ruin world religions. It will throw world religions into an existential crisis. No, it wouldn't. Not Islam, at least. And I don't believe it will apply to the Christian tradition either, because the Christians have been talking about this since the 50s, and they've been mentioning it's demons or fallen angels, right? But specifically from an Islamic perspective, it's not a problem at all, because we have a built-in framework, concepts within the religion and tradition, which account for this phenomenon, through which we can make sense of this phenomenon, right? So either way you look at it, Islam can account for it. These were just some thoughts, inshallah. I'll probably do something a bit more detailed in the future, but hopefully this was beneficial. So brings together what we've been saying for a while now, and gives some food for thought to some people that are interested in this topic and are looking into the jinn. And let me know your thoughts definitely in the comments section below. And I will speak to you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum.